Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we're tackling taxes.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, right? Not usually a fun topic, but hopefully we can make it interesting.
I think so.
Especially with all this amazing research by Edgar Kaiser at the University of Washington.
Yeah, he's done some really groundbreaking work looking at the history and potential futures of taxation.
And one of the things that really jumped out at me was that taxes are actually a relatively new concept historically.
Isn't that crazy? We just think of it as a given in modern society.
Yeah.
But it has a much more recent origin story than I think most people would expect.
Right. I mean, I was reading about researchers literally deciphering ancient Egyptian tax systems from breaking pottery and scraps of papyrus.
Oh,
it just blows my mind. How do you even begin to piece together a tax code from a broken clay pot?
I know. It's pretty amazing what archaeologists and historians can do.
Right. So what they found was that these early forms of taxation, going back to around 3000 BC in Egypt, often looked like forced labor, like building pyramids, right, or taking a percentage of what people produce, a portion of their harvest.
Yeah, you could almost think of it as paying rent to the pharaoh. But instead of cold, hard cash, yeah, you're giving back breaking labor or a share of your crops.
Talk about a different kind of tax burden.
Yeah, I know, right? No one's sending you a bill in the mail.
But did these early systems even generate much revenue?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. They actually managed to rake in about 5% of the total economic output, which we call GDP.
Okay.
Which, that might not sound like much, but remember, populations were way smaller.
Right.
Mainly agrarian, and rulers just didn't have the administrative power to really collect much more.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine trying to keep track of everyone's income and assets across a vast empire without modern communication or transportation.
Right, it would be impossible.
It's like trying to run the IRS on carrier pigeons.
Exactly.
But that small percentage collected consistently over time did result in some pretty impressive feats of engineering.
Oh, for sure, yeah, like those pyramids.
It makes you think about what we could achieve today if we directed even a slightly larger portion of tax revenue towards specific goals.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how even seemingly small amounts of revenue, when collected consistently, can have a huge impact over time.
Right. And then you have the opposite, which is
yeah,
this example from the research that the French king couldn't effectively tax Brittany because he lacked the infrastructure to even know what was happening there.
Right. No roads, no communication.
So basically, pre-industrial states were playing a constant game of catch-up, just trying to keep their heads above water, let alone build these massive public works projects.
Yeah, they were always struggling to keep up.
So when did things actually start to change? I know the research mentioned the Industrial Revolution as a major turning point. Was it just better technology leading to better tax collection?
Technology definitely played a part, especially railroads. Not only did they revolutionize transportation and communication, which, did lead to better record-keeping and more effective tax collection, but they also coincided with the rise of modern nation-states with these centralized governments that were better equipped to manage larger, more complex systems, including taxation.
It's funny to think of trains as tax collection enablers.
I know, right?
But it makes sense. Railroads shrink distances and facilitate the exchange of information.
They basically laid the tracks for modern tax systems.
Exactly.
And this also connects to the rising demand for public services that came with the Industrial Revolution. Infrastructure, education, sanitation, all these things require funding. And that funding comes from, you guessed it, taxes.
So basically, as societies modernize, they need more from their governments, and governments in turn need more from their citizens in the form of taxes.
Exactly. It's a sort of feedback loop.
Did this shift also impact the relationship between citizens and governments? How did people view this new demand for taxes?
That's a great question. And it brings us to the evolution of the social contract, that unspoken agreement between citizens and their governments. Have you ever stopped to consider the deal you get in exchange for paying taxes?
To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it that deeply before this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's easy to just kind of grumble about taxes,
right,
without really considering what we get in return.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like complaining about the price of a movie ticket, but forgetting about the 2 hours of entertainment you get.
Exactly. It's all about perspective.
So let's talk about that perspective then.
Okay.
Let's go back, way back to those feudal systems you mentioned.
Okay.
Imagine knights providing military service to their lords in exchange for land.
Right.
And then you have peasants paying taxes in exchange for something like protection from bandits and invading armies.
Right, although it wasn't always the most reliable protection.
Right, that's true. So it was more about like obligations and protection than a true exchange of value.
Yeah, it was a different time.
But today, instead of knights and lords, we have citizens and governments. So has the basic concept of an exchange, contributions for benefits, fundamentally changed?
Well, it has evolved, for sure, but that core principle is still there.
Oh.
The modern social contract involves citizens paying taxes for public services and infrastructure, things like roads, schools, healthcare, national defense.
Right.
The expectation is that governments will use our taxes wisely and provide these essential services.
So it's like we're constantly evaluating whether we're getting a good return on our tax investment?
Kind of, yeah.
We complain about potholes or long wait times at the DMV, never stopping to think, hey, maybe if we all chipped in a little more, these things would run smoother.
That's a really good point, and you've actually hit on a crucial aspect of this whole thing. In the past, taxes were often earmarked.
Meaning?
They were directly tied to specific services.
Okay.
So if you paid a road tax, you could literally see your money being used to pave the road in your town.
I see.
But in modern systems, taxes are often pooled into like general funds.
Right.
It becomes harder to see that direct connection between what you pay and what you get. And that can definitely erode trust in the system.
It's like the difference between donating directly to a specific charity and giving to a giant fundraising organization.
Yeah.
You just kind of hope your money is going to good causes, but you don't always know for sure.
Exactly. And that uncertainty can breed distrust.
So how do we ensure people feel like they're getting a good deal and maintain faith in the system, especially when you consider that the way we tax has also changed significantly over time?
Right.
Take, for instance, progressive taxation, where wealthier people pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Did that always exist?
Surprisingly, no progressive taxation is actually a relatively recent development. It emerged only in the late 19th century.
Wow. So before that,
Yeah.
tax systems were often regressive.
Mm-hmm. Meaning poorer people actually shouldered a heavier burden relative to their income.
So this idea of the wealthy contributing more proportionally is a pretty new concept.
Yeah, relatively speaking.
But if it's designed to create a fairer system, why is it facing so many challenges today?
Right.
The research hinted at some potential issues with its long-term sustainability.
Yeah. Well, one issue is that progressive taxation can, in some cases, lead to increased class conflict.
Okay.
If wealthy individuals and corporations feel unfairly targeted, they might resist paying taxes or find ways to minimize their tax burden,
Makes sense.
legally or otherwise.
Right. If you feel like the system is rigged against you, you're less likely to play by the rules, especially if you have the resources to find loopholes.
Exactly. And this problem is made even worse by the increasing mobility of capital in our globalized economy.
Right.
It's easier than ever for wealthy individuals and corporations to move their money around the globe, essentially shopping for countries with the lowest tax rates.
So they can just kind of dodge the higher taxes.
In a way, yeah, it puts pressure on governments to compete for revenue, potentially leading to a race to the bottom in terms of tax rates, especially for the wealthy.
But isn't globalization also creating new opportunities for taxation? Like, what about taxing digital transactions that cross borders?
That's a great point, and it's definitely a hot topic in international tax policy circles.
So could that be a way to level the playing field?
Potentially, it highlights the complexities of trying to create a fair and effective tax system in an increasingly interconnected world.
Right.
The European Union, for example, is constantly struggling to prevent wealthy individuals from hiding assets.
Wow. So it really is like a global game of hide and seek with money.
Exactly, and governments are definitely playing catch up.
So if the wealthy can dodge taxes so easily, what does that mean for the future of a system specifically designed to make them pay more? Could we see a complete shift away from progressive taxation?
It's definitely a possibility. Some experts argue that the increasing mobility of capital might make progressive taxation unsustainable in the long run.
Okay.
But others point to alternative models like the Scandinavian social democracies as proof that it is possible to balance high taxes with high levels of public services and benefits.
Yeah, the Scandinavian model was super interesting. It seems like they've really figured out how to make high taxes work. Everyone pays a relatively high rate, but they get universal healthcare-free education and robust social safety nets in return.
That's right. The Scandinavian model emphasizes shared responsibility and shared benefits.
Okay.
It's less about making the wealthy pay, more and more about creating a system where everyone contributes and benefits, and this can create a sense of social solidarity and support for the system as a whole.
Right, because everyone is benefiting.
Exactly. But there are challenges to consider as well.
What kind of challenges? It seems like a pretty good deal, if you ask me.
Well, one key challenge is that the Scandinavian model has historically thrived in countries with relatively homogeneous populations.
Okay.
There's a concern that increasing diversity could lead to a decline in public support for high taxes and those generous welfare programs.
So in a more diverse society, people might be less willing to pay for services that they perceive as benefiting others, but not themselves.
Right, or their in-group.
That makes sense. But isn't that assuming people are inherently selfish?
It's not necessarily about selfishness. It's more about social trust and a sense of shared identity.
Okay.
When people feel a strong sense of community and believe that everyone is contributing and benefiting fairly, they're more likely to support high taxes and generous social programs.
Right.
But when that sense of shared identity weakens, people might be less inclined to support a system where they feel like they're paying for others who aren't like them.
So is the Scandinavian model just a product of unique cultural circumstances, or could it potentially work in other parts of the world?
It's a complex question with no easy answers. The research suggests that the success of any tax system, whether progressive, social democratic, or something else, entirely depends on a number of factors. We've talked about social trust and shared identity.
Right.
But there's also political stability and, crucially, public perception of fairness.
So if trust and a sense of fairness are key, how do we build those things in increasingly diverse and often divided societies?
It's a challenge, for sure, but it's not insurmountable. Remember, the social contract is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
It's a product of ongoing negotiation and adaptation. If we want to create a tax system that works for everyone, we need to engage in open and honest conversations about our values, our priorities, and what we're willing to contribute to the common good.
This whole deep dive has really highlighted how intertwined taxes are with our values and our vision for society.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers and spreadsheets.
It's about power.
Yeah.
Social contracts, the constant negotiation between individual responsibility and collective well-being. We started by talking about ancient Egyptians paying taxes in grain and labor, and now we're contemplating potential futures that range from Scandinavian-style social democracy to a semi-feudal system where the wealthy elite essentially opt out.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
I'd say this as we move forward. Think about what kind of social contract you want with your government. What are you willing to contribute? And what do you expect in return?
Right.
What does a fair and sustainable tax system look like to you? And how can we work together to build it?
Big questions.
Yeah. And remember, the future of taxation isn't predetermined. It's in our hands.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time. Keep those critical thinking caps on. And remember, the future is ours to shape.